The morning started quietly at the Golden Spoon Cafe, a small but cozy place known for its warm coffee and friendly smiles. The sunlight streamed through the big glass windows, making the golden walls glow softly. Emily, the young waitress with brown hair tied neatly in a bun, was already on her feet since 7 a.m. She loved her job, not because it paid much, but because she enjoyed meeting people and spreading kindness. Every morning, she made sure to greet each customer with a smile, no matter how tired she felt inside. It was supposed to be a normal day. The regular customers had already started coming in. The old couple who always argued about toast, the office workers rushing to grab their coffee, and the group of students who sat in the corner sharing jokes. Everything felt routine until the cafe door opened, and silence swept through the room. A sleek black car had stopped outside, followed by another behind it. Two men in suits walked in first, scanning the room quickly, then stepped aside to open the door for someone else. Everyone in the cafe turned their heads when a tall, well-dressed man and an elderly lady entered. The man looked serious, powerful, the kind of person you didn't usually see in a small-town cafe. His suit alone probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The woman beside him, however, had a soft and peaceful face. Her silver hair was tied neatly in a bun, and she held onto his arm gently, her eyes filled with quiet warmth. Emily quickly straightened her apron and stepped forward, her professional smile shining. "Good morning. Table for two?" she asked kindly. The man nodded with a polite smile but said nothing. He gently guided his mother to a corner table by the window, where sunlight danced over the surface. As they sat down, Emily handed them the menus and poured water into their glasses. She noticed something right away. The older woman didn't respond when Emily asked, "Would you like some coffee or tea, ma'am?" Instead, she smiled gently but looked to her son for help. Before Emily could repeat herself, the man spoke softly. "My mother is deaf." For a second, Emily froze, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she didn't expect it. She nodded politely, her smile not fading, and simply said, "That's okay." She turned to the older woman again, her eyes kind, and placed her hand over her heart, then gestured toward the coffee machine. The elderly lady tilted her head slightly, curious at Emily's gentle attempt to communicate. Around them, whispers started. Other waiters murmured to each other, recognizing the man immediately. "That's Harrison Cole," one whispered, wide-eyed. "The billionaire from Cole Industries." Another added, "What's he doing here?" The staff quietly tried to serve other customers, but their eyes kept drifting to the corner table. Harrison noticed the stares and frowned slightly. He wasn't a man who enjoyed attention. He came here because his mother, Margaret, had wanted to visit a small-town cafe like the ones she used to love when she was younger. For her, simple places brought peace, something their luxurious life rarely offered. Emily, unaware of the gossip, focused only on the two of them. She could tell the man was protective of his mother, and she admired that. She wanted them to feel comfortable. After taking their order, black coffee for him and herbal tea for his mother, she walked back to the counter, but her mind stayed on them. Margaret looked around the cafe with a soft smile. She watched the people laugh and talk, but there was always that invisible wall, a quiet world only she could hear. Emily felt that somehow and decided she wouldn't let that silence feel lonely. When she returned with their drinks, she placed them gently on the table, then did something no one expected. She moved her hands gracefully, forming shapes and gestures that only a few would understand. She was signing. "Good morning," she signed slowly, smiling at Margaret. "How are you today?" For a split second, the old woman blinked, not believing what she saw. Then her face lit up completely, her hands trembling slightly before she responded in the same language, sign language. Her son looked at Emily, shocked. He had been to hundreds of restaurants, and no one had ever tried to speak to his mother like that. The whole cafe grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't because of who the man was. It was because of the beautiful, silent conversation happening at that corner table. Emily's hands moved softly and fluently. Margaret laughed soundlessly, her eyes sparkling with joy. Even without hearing her voice, Everyone could see the happiness radiating from her face. Harrison watched silently, his expression softening. He hadn't seen his mother smile like that in years, not that genuinely. For once, she wasn't being treated like someone different or fragile. She was just being spoken to in her language. When Emily walked back to the counter after serving them, one of her coworkers whispered, "You know sign language?" Emily nodded with a small smile. "My younger brother is deaf," she said quietly. "So I learned. It's not hard once you really want to talk to someone." The staff stood there silently, feeling a bit humbled. They had been focused on who the customer was, a billionaire, but Emily saw something else. She saw a mother, a woman who simply wanted to be understood. Back at the table, Margaret couldn't stop signing small messages of gratitude to her son. She kept pointing at Emily, smiling brightly. Harrison nodded quietly, still processing everything. For the first time in a long time, someone had reached his mother's world. Not through money, but through kindness. As they left the cafe later, Emily waved goodbye with a smile. Margaret signed, "Thank you," before stepping out. Harrison paused for a second at the door, gave Emily a small nod, and said softly, "You made her day." When the door closed behind them, Emily exhaled deeply, not knowing that this small moment of kindness would soon change her life forever. The customers whispered about what had just happened, and one of them quietly recorded the touching scene without anyone noticing. That morning, what started as an ordinary day at a small cafe became the beginning of something extraordinary. A meeting that would soon touch millions of hearts across the world. The next day, the cafe buzzed with quiet excitement. Everyone was still talking about the mysterious man and his elegant mother who had visited the morning before. Rumors had spread quickly. Some said he was a billionaire. Others claimed he owned half the city. But for Emily, it wasn't about the man's money. What stayed in her mind was the smile of the kind old woman, Margaret, and the warmth in her silent laugh. As the clock struck 11, the cafe door opened again, and to everyone's surprise, the same two people walked in. Harrison Cole and his mother had returned. This time, the cafe grew completely still. Even the sound of clinking cups paused for a second. Everyone pretended to work, but their eyes followed the pair as they made their way to the same corner table by the window. Emily's heart gave a small leap. She didn't expect them to come back so soon. She wiped her hands on her apron, straightened her collar, and approached them with her usual soft smile. "Welcome back," she said, her voice calm but her heart racing a little. Harrison gave her a polite nod while his mother smiled warmly, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw Emily. Emily placed the menus gently on the table, but there was a moment of hesitation. Harrison looked around, noticing people whispering again. He sighed quietly. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had spent years trying to keep his private life away from the public eye, and now even a simple lunch with his mother had become a spectacle. Margaret didn't notice any of that. Her eyes were on Emily, her hands moving slightly as if she wanted to say something. Emily understood the signs immediately. "You're happy to see me again?" she signed with a small grin. Margaret nodded quickly, signing back with excitement. The bond between them was already visible, and it made the moment glow with warmth. But that warmth didn't reach everyone. In the far corner, two waiters whispered to each other. "She's really doing sign language again," one said, half impressed, half curious. "Yeah, but what if she offends them somehow? Rich people are sensitive." Emily caught their words but didn't react. She knew people often misunderstood things they didn't know. Harrison looked up and noticed Emily and his mother communicating again in sign language. He didn't interrupt, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even a little discomfort. It wasn't because he didn't like it, but because it reminded him of how distant he sometimes felt from his own mother. Despite loving her deeply, he had never learned her language. He had always been too busy with business, meetings, and travel. And now here was a stranger, a waitress, who spoke to her with such natural kindness that it felt both beautiful and painful. When Emily finished taking their order, she smiled and left to prepare their drinks. Harrison leaned back, watching his mother, who was still smiling like a child. You really like her, don't you, Mom? He asked softly. Margaret nodded and signed something. Harrison recognized a few words, good heart, and understands. He nodded silently, feeling a pang of guilt he couldn't explain. Back at the counter, Emily poured the coffee carefully, her thoughts drifting. She remembered how, growing up, her younger brother, Liam, used to sit alone in school because nobody could talk to him. She had watched him struggle to understand jokes or conversations, and that loneliness had shaped her deeply. That was the reason she had learned sign language, so no one around her would ever feel left out again. When she returned to the table with the drinks, something unexpected happened. Margaret tried to sign a thank you to her son, but her hand accidentally knocked over the cup slightly. A few drops of tea spilled on the table. Harrison immediately reached for a napkin, but Emily got there first. It's okay, she said softly, quickly cleaning the spill. She looked up at Margaret and signed gently, no problem, happens all the time. Margaret's tense expression softened, and she smiled again, grateful for Emily's calm reaction. But Harrison frowned a little. You don't have to do that, he said politely, his tone gentle but distant. We can manage. Emily smiled kindly, not offended. I know, sir, but it's my job to make sure you're comfortable. For a moment, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the slightly awkward kind that fills the air when two people from very different worlds meet. Harrison didn't mean to sound cold. He was just not used to being helped. He was a man who spent years in boardrooms, where kindness was often mistaken for weakness. But here, in this small cafe, kindness seemed to mean something entirely different. Margaret broke the silence with a soft laugh, silent but bright. She began signing again, her hands moving fast, trying to explain something to her son. Emily couldn't help smiling as she watched the mother's animated gestures. She says, Emily translated with a grin, that you should smile more. It makes you look less scary. For the first time that day, Harrison actually laughed. A small, genuine laugh. Did she really say that? He asked. Emily nodded, and Margaret nodded too, her eyes twinkling mischievously. The tension in the air melted instantly. Other customers, seeing the change, began smiling too. The awkwardness that had filled the cafe moments ago slowly disappeared. Emily didn't just serve food that day. She served warmth, connection, and understanding. As they finished their lunch, Margaret kept signing stories about her past. About how she lost her hearing as a child. About the music she used to love. About her husband who used to dance with her even after she could no longer hear the song. Emily listened intently, translating little bits for Harrison, who sat quietly, his heart heavier with every word. When it was time to leave, Harrison stood and helped his mother up. Emily came to say goodbye. Margaret held Emily's hand and signed a few words with great emotion. Emily's eyes softened, and she translated softly for Harrison. She says, she feels like she found a friend today. Harrison didn't say much, but he looked at Emily differently this time. Not just as a waitress, but as someone who had given his mother something priceless. A voice in a world that often ignored her silence. As they walked out, the cafe returned to its usual noise, but Emily stood by the door for a while, watching them leave. She had no idea that this simple connection, one act of kindness, would soon lead to something much bigger, something that would change all their lives forever. The cafe was calm that morning, filled with the gentle sound of clinking cups and soft conversations. Sunlight streamed through the windows, spreading warmth across the tables. Emily was wiping the counter when she noticed a familiar car stop outside. Her heart lifted a little. It was the same black luxury car from before. The tall man, Harrison Cole, stepped out first and then helped his elderly mother, Margaret, walk carefully toward the entrance. The moment they entered, the entire atmosphere shifted. Everyone seemed to recognize them by now. Some customers whispered quietly, "That's the billionaire again," while others just watched curiously. But Emily didn't look at them like that. To her, they weren't celebrities or rich people, they were just guests. Especially Margaret, whose kind eyes had left a deep mark on her heart. Emily quickly approached with her usual calm smile. "Welcome back," she said softly. "It's nice to see you both again." Harrison nodded politely, But before he could reply, Margaret raised her hand and made a small gesture, a familiar one. Emily's eyes lit up immediately. She smiled warmly and signed back, "Good morning. How are you today?" That single moment changed everything inside the cafe. Harrison froze, stunned again by how easily Emily spoke his mother's silent language. The other staff members looked up from behind the counter, their mouths slightly open. Even the customers nearby turned to watch. It wasn't something they saw every day. A waitress signing beautifully and fluently with such grace. Margaret's face brightened instantly. She reached out her hands and began signing quickly, her movements full of excitement and joy. For years, she had been surrounded by people who either ignored her silence or struggled awkwardly to communicate. But here, in this small cafe, this young woman spoke to her as naturally as breathing. Emily signed back with a soft smile. "You look lovely today. Did you enjoy the tea last time?" Margaret nodded eagerly and signed, "Yes, it was perfect. You remembered." "Of course," Emily replied through signs, her eyes kind. "I remember my favorite customers." The two of them shared a laugh, silent, yet more expressive than words. Harrison just sat there watching, speechless. He could feel something stir in his chest. For years, he had watched his mother live in a world quieter than his. One where communication often ended in frustration. People pitied her or avoided her, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But here was this waitress, someone his world would never notice, who treated his mother not with pity, but with respect and warmth. When Emily left briefly to bring their order, Harrison leaned toward his mother. "You really like her, don't you?" he said softly. Margaret nodded, her hands moving rapidly. She signed something that made him smile in disbelief. "She says," he murmured to himself, "you should hire her before someone else does." When Emily returned with their food, she continued signing small conversations with Margaret. They talked about simple things, the weather, the flowers by the window, even the funny way people tried to whisper about them. Margaret laughed silently again, her eyes filled with light. Emily found herself laughing too. It was as if they had known each other for years. Other customers began noticing. A young boy at a nearby table tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, what's she doing with her hands?" The mother smiled softly. "She's talking," she said, but without words. Soon, everyone in the cafe grew quiet, not out of awkwardness, but out of admiration. They watched the beautiful exchange between the waitress and the deaf woman. Two people connected by gestures and kindness. It was silent, but somehow, it felt louder than anything else in the room. One older man sitting by the counter sighed and said softly, "That's the most beautiful thing I've seen in years." Another nodded, adding, "People like her remind you what kindness really looks like." Harrison felt a strange emotion he couldn't quite name. He had built companies, signed million-dollar deals, and managed hundreds of employees, but he had never felt this kind of warmth from anything before. For the first time, he realized that money couldn't buy what Emily had just given his mother, the simple gift of being seen, of being spoken to in her own world. As they ate, Margaret signed stories from her younger days, about how she lost her hearing when she was only 9, about how she learned to read lips, and about how the world slowly grew quieter around her. Emily listened carefully, signing back gentle questions, nodding, and smiling throughout. To everyone watching, it looked like poetry in motion. Hands dancing through the air, expressing joy, memories, and emotion without a single sound. When Emily brought dessert, she added a small touch, a slice of lemon cake with a tiny note that said, "For my favorite guest." Margaret beamed and tapped her son's arm to show him. Harrison read the note and smiled, then looked up at Emily. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I wanted to," Emily replied. "Your mother has a lovely spirit. She makes the cafe brighter." Harrison stared at her for a second, surprised by her genuine tone. Most people he met tried to impress him because of his money. Emily hadn't even mentioned it once. She didn't look at him like a billionaire, just like any other man who came in for lunch with his mother. Margaret touched Emily's hand gently before leaving and signed a long message. Emily's eyes softened as she read it. Then she translated for Harrison. She said, "Thank you for talking to her. She said it feels nice to be heard, even without sound." For a moment, Harrison didn't know what to say. His throat tightened slightly. He finally managed to reply, "Please tell her. She deserves to be heard every day." Emily signed those words to Margaret, who smiled with tears in her eyes. She placed her hand over her heart, then over Emily's. The gesture needed no translation. It was pure gratitude. As they stood up to leave, something magical happened. One of the customers started clapping softly, followed by another, and then the entire cafe joined in. Not because of who Harrison was, but because of what they had witnessed. A simple act of connection that spoke louder than wealth or fame. Emily blushed and looked down shyly, but Margaret reached out, gently lifting her chin and smiling proudly. When they finally walked out, Harrison paused at the door. He turned to Emily and said softly, "You made this day unforgettable for her, and for me." After they left, the cafe slowly returned to its usual hum, but everyone there knew they had just seen something rare, something beautiful. It wasn't just a waitress serving a billionaire's mother. It was a reminder that kindness, when spoken from the heart, doesn't need sound to be heard. That day, Emily didn't just serve coffee. She served connection. She served understanding. And without realizing it, she had touched not only one family's life but everyone who had been lucky enough to witness that beautiful, silent moment. The bond between Emily and Margaret began to grow stronger with every visit. After that beautiful day in the cafe, when Emily spoke to Margaret through sign language, something changed in both of them. It wasn't just about coffee or lunch anymore. It was about friendship, about two hearts finding comfort in each other's kindness. Every few days, the same black luxury car would pull up outside the Golden Spoon Cafe, and every time, Margaret would walk in with the same soft smile that lit up the whole place. The staff had stopped whispering by now. They had gotten used to seeing the billionaire and his mother at their little cafe. But what still amazed everyone was how the old woman's face came alive the moment she saw Emily. Emily always saved a quiet corner table for them, near the window, where sunlight touched the edge of their cups. The moment Margaret sat down, Emily would come over, and their hands would start to move, graceful, fluid, full of expression. They would laugh silently, share stories, and even tease each other. It was a language that few around them understood, yet everyone could feel its warmth. One morning, when they arrived, the cafe was busier than usual. Emily noticed Margaret looking a bit tired, her steps slower than before. She quickly came over and signed, "Would you like to sit somewhere quieter today?" Margaret nodded gratefully, and Emily guided her to a peaceful corner. She placed a small vase with fresh daisies on the table. "Your favorite flowers," Emily signed, smiling. Margaret touched one of the flowers gently and looked up with a sparkle in her eyes. "You remembered," she signed back. "Of course," Emily replied. "Good friends never forget." Harrison, sitting quietly beside his mother, watched their exchange with silent amazement. He was used to seeing people treat his mother with formality, either overly polite or uncomfortably distant. But Emily treated her like family. She spoke to her, laughed with her, and made her feel normal, not different. For a man who spent his life surrounded by people who only cared about money, that sight touched something deep in him. As the morning went on, Margaret and Emily's bond deepened. They spoke through their hands about everything. About Emily's little brother, Liam, who was deaf and studying art, and about Margaret's childhood in a small town, where she used to paint sunsets before she lost her hearing. Emily learned that Margaret had once dreamed of being an art teacher, but life had taken her in another direction. "You can still teach," Emily signed one day. "You could teach me how to paint." Margaret's face lit up, her eyes soft with emotion. "Really?" she signed, her hands trembling slightly. "No one ever asked me that before." "Then it's time someone did," Emily signed with a grin. From that day on, their friendship grew beyond cafe tables. Margaret began bringing small drawings she made at home. Flowers, birds, little sketches of the cafe. Emily would display them near the counter with a small tag that said, "From a special friend." Customers often stopped to admire them, and Margaret would blush silently, signing shyly, "Too much attention." One afternoon, as they sat together, a little girl came into the cafe with her mother. The girl noticed Emily signing with Margaret and tugged at her mom's sleeve. "What are they doing?" she whispered. "They're talking in sign language," her mother replied softly. The girl watched for a while, fascinated. Then she walked up to the table and asked Emily, "Can you teach me one word?" Emily smiled and bent down. "Sure," she said kindly. "Let's teach you how to say hello." She showed the girl how to move her hand gently in greeting. Margaret clapped silently, laughing. The little girl waved at her and signed, "Hello." Margaret's face lit up brighter than the morning sun. Everyone in the cafe smiled watching that. The old woman, the young waitress, and the little girl connecting without a single sound. It was a small moment, but it felt magical, as if the entire cafe was learning a new kind of language, the language of kindness. After that, Margaret started visiting more often, sometimes even without her son. The driver would drop her off, and she would spend hours at the cafe with Emily. They would have tea, sign about their day, and sometimes sit in silence, enjoying each other's company. Even in silence, there was understanding between them, a feeling that didn't need words. One rainy afternoon, when thunder rolled outside and the cafe was almost empty, Margaret looked at Emily and signed, "You remind me of my daughter." Emily's hands paused. "You have a daughter?" she asked through signs. Margaret shook her head, smiling sadly. "No," she signed. "I meant, if I ever had one, I would want her to be like you." Emily's eyes softened with tears she tried to hide. She reached out and gently squeezed Margaret's hand. "Then you already have one," she signed back, "because you're like a mother to me." Margaret's hands trembled as she signed a single word, "Family." Then she placed her hand over her heart, and Emily did the same. From that moment, their relationship was no longer just a friendship. It was something deeper, a bond beyond words. Harrison noticed the change too. He had never seen his mother so full of life, so happy to wake up each morning just to visit someone. It amazed him how one waitress, a stranger, had managed to bring such light into his mother's quiet world. He often sat quietly at the cafe, pretending to check his phone while secretly watching them. It reminded him of the simple things he had lost in his chase for success. One day, as they were leaving, Margaret signed to Emily, "You've given me a voice again." Emily smiled through tears. "No," she signed. "You already had one. People just forgot how to listen." That night, as Emily closed the cafe, she found a small envelope on the counter with her name written on it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet and a note in neat handwriting. The note read, "Dear Emily, thank you for reminding me that even in silence, we can be heard. With love, Margaret." Emily held the bracelet close, tears filling her eyes. She knew she had found something rare, a friendship that didn't need words, money, or noise to be real. It was built on compassion, understanding, and the purest form of communication, the heart. From that day forward, whenever someone asked Margaret about her favorite place, she didn't say a mansion or a resort. She signed one word with a smile, "Cafe." And for Emily, that little cafe wasn't just a workplace anymore. It had become a place where a simple act of kindness had turned into something beautiful, a bond that neither time nor silence could ever break. The day began like any other at the Golden Spoon Cafe. The morning sun warmed the windows, the air smelled of fresh coffee, and the quiet hum of conversation filled the room. Emily was moving between tables, smiling and greeting her regular customers. But when the familiar black luxury car stopped outside, her smile brightened even more. She knew exactly who it was. Margaret and her son, Harrison Cole. They had been coming to the cafe often lately, and every visit felt special. But this time, something was different. When Harrison and his mother entered, Margaret looked especially cheerful, almost glowing. She waved at Emily with a big smile, and Emily immediately walked over, signing, "Good morning. You look very happy today." Margaret nodded quickly, her hands moving in excitement. "My son is taking me to visit the art museum after this," she signed. "I haven't been there in years." "That sounds wonderful," Emily signed back, her eyes lighting up. "You must tell me all about it when you come next time." Harrison watched them with quiet amusement. Every time he saw his mother and Emily together, he couldn't help but feel something stir inside him. It wasn't just admiration, it was deep respect. Emily wasn't like anyone he had met before. She didn't treat his mother like someone fragile or special. She treated her like a person, someone with stories, dreams, and emotions. When Emily left to bring their order, Harrison leaned toward his mother and whispered, "You really like her, don't you?" Margaret smiled, signing quickly, "She understands me. She listens with her heart. You should too." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I do listen." Margaret shook her head, still smiling. "You hear, but you don't always listen." Her words stayed with him. When Emily returned with their tea and coffee, Harrison decided to finally ask what had been on his mind for a while. "Emily," he said softly, "if you don't mind me asking, how did you learn sign language so well?" Emily paused, surprised by the question. Then she smiled gently and sat down for a moment, her hands resting on the tray. "My younger brother Liam was born deaf," she said. "At first, my parents didn't know how to communicate with him. He was just a baby, but I could see how he looked at us, confused and sad, because he couldn't understand what we were saying. So I decided to learn. I was only 9, but I practiced every night using books and videos. And when I finally signed my first word to him, his whole face lit up. That's when I realized how important it is to make someone feel included." Margaret's eyes softened as Emily signed along with her words so she could understand too. Harrison listened quietly, his heart heavy with emotion. Emily's story wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was full of heart. It was real. She continued, "Liam is grown now. He's studying art, and he paints beautiful things, even though he can't hear a single sound. He says the world speaks to him through colors." She smiled as she said it, her eyes full of pride. "That's incredible," Harrison said quietly. "Most people would have given up trying." Emily shook her head. "When you love someone, you don't give up. You find a way." Those words struck something deep inside Harrison. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He looked at his mother, who was watching Emily with tears in her eyes. Margaret signed softly to her son. "Now you see why I like her?" Harrison nodded slowly, finally understanding. The rest of the meal went by warmly. Margaret and Emily continued to chat in sign language, and every now and then, Emily would translate for Harrison so he could join in. For the first time, he wasn't just a spectator, he was part of the conversation. He asked his mother questions through Emily, and the three of them laughed together like old friends. At one point, a group of customers at the next table leaned over and whispered, "That waitress must be really brave to talk to him like that. He's so powerful." But Emily didn't treat him like a powerful man. She talked to him with ease, with honesty, the way she talked to everyone else. When it was time for them to leave, Harrison stood by the counter to pay. Emily reached to hand him the bill, but he hesitated for a moment and said quietly, "You've made my mother happier than I've seen her in years." "Thank you." Emily smiled. "She's a wonderful person. It's easy to care about her." Harrison hesitated again, then asked softly, "Can I ask you one more question?" "Of course," she said. He looked thoughtful for a second. "Do you ever feel like the world doesn't notice kindness anymore?" Emily looked down for a moment, then replied gently, "I think kindness is still there. People just forget to look for it, but it never disappears." Her words hung in the air, soft but powerful. Later that afternoon, when Margaret and Harrison left, one of the waitresses whispered to Emily, "Do you know who he really is? He's one of the richest men in the city." Emily chuckled lightly. "Maybe, but to me, he's just a son who loves his mom." She didn't realize Harrison had paused near the door and overheard that. He turned back slightly, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Respect, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. As he stepped out with his mother, Margaret signed to him. "You should do something for her." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." That night, as Emily was cleaning the cafe, she kept thinking about the conversation. She hadn't expected the powerful billionaire to be so quiet, so thoughtful. But beneath his calm face, she sensed a kind heart, one that had been buried under the weight of business and success. Meanwhile, in the back seat of the car, Margaret signed to her son again. "You know, money can build walls, but kindness builds bridges." Harrison smiled at that, looking out the window as the cafe lights disappeared behind them. "You're right, Mom," he said softly, "and I think we just crossed one today." For Emily, the day ended like any other, tired but peaceful. She had no idea that her simple story about her brother and her gentle kindness had left a mark on one of the most powerful men in the city. And for Harrison, it was the first time in a long while that he drove home thinking not about business deals or meetings, but about something far more valuable, the quiet strength of compassion, and the young waitress who reminded him of what truly mattered in life. The next morning at the Golden Spoon Cafe began quietly, but Emily felt something different in the air. The place was busy, yet her mind kept drifting back to the billionaire and his mother. Something about them, especially the warmth between them, stayed in her thoughts. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like there was more to their story than she knew. As she poured coffee for the early customers, the cafe door opened. Emily looked up and froze for a moment. Harrison Cole stood there, but this time he was alone. No driver, no assistant, no mother. Just him, dressed simply in a gray shirt and jeans. He looked ordinary, but his eyes held a certain seriousness. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Emily said politely, smiling. "Your usual table?" He nodded with a faint smile. "Please, just call me Harrison," he said quietly. Emily nodded and led him to his usual seat by the window. As she handed him the menu, he said softly, "I didn't come for breakfast today. I came to talk." Emily blinked, surprised. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "There's something you should know, something I haven't told you." She sat down slowly, curious. "Okay. What is it?" Harrison took a deep breath. "You see, my mother's life hasn't always been this comfortable. Before I built my company, we had nothing. My father left when I was a child, and my mother struggled to raise me. She worked at a bakery, often late at night, and still made time to help me with school. But when I got older and started my business, I got so caught up in money and success that I forgot what truly mattered." Emily listened quietly, her eyes soft. He continued, his voice lower now. "A few years ago, my mother lost her hearing completely. It was sudden, a result of a medical condition. At first, I didn't know how to handle it. I tried hiring nurses, interpreters, specialists, but nothing made her smile. She was lonely, even when surrounded by people. I thought money could fix it all, but it couldn't." He looked down at his hands. "Then, a few weeks ago, she insisted on coming here. She said she'd found a cafe online that felt warm, whatever that meant. I didn't understand her until I saw you with her. For the first time in years, I saw her laugh, really laugh. You made her feel seen." Emily felt her heart swell. She didn't know what to say. "She's wonderful," she said softly. "I just wanted her to feel comfortable." He nodded. "You did more than that. You reminded her what connection feels like. And you reminded me too." There was silence between them for a moment, the kind of silence that felt deep, not awkward. Then Harrison looked up again, his expression changing slightly. "But there's more," he said quietly. "I didn't just come to thank you. I came because I found something you deserve to know." Emily frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Last week, after our visit, my mother couldn't stop talking about you. She told me about your brother, Liam. She said you reminded her of herself when she was younger. So, I asked my assistant to check something. I hope you don't mind. It wasn't meant to invade your privacy." Emily hesitated before slowly unfolding the paper. It was a letter from the City Art Foundation. Her eyes widened as she read. "Dear Emily Sanders," it said, "we are pleased to inform you that your brother Liam's painting has been selected for the National Youth Art Exhibition. However, due to incomplete sponsorship documentation, his entry has been temporarily placed on hold." Her hand trembled slightly as she looked up at Harrison. I didn't know about this. Liam never told me." Harrison nodded gently. "He probably didn't want to worry you. The foundation needed a sponsorship fee for his entry, something he couldn't afford. So, I called them this morning and took care of it. Your brother's art will be displayed next month." Emily's eyes filled with tears. You did that?" He smiled softly. "Actually, it was my mother's idea," she said. "If kindness speaks in silence, let's answer it with action." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't feel enough." "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "You gave us something priceless, joy. This is just our way of returning a piece of it." For a moment, Emily just sat there, unable to speak. All the noise in the cafe faded. The chatter, the clinking dishes, everything disappeared. She could only see Harrison's calm eyes and the kindness behind them. Then she laughed softly through her tears. I always thought people with a lot of money forgot how to care. I guess I was wrong." Harrison chuckled quietly. "Maybe I did forget for a while, but meeting you and my mom together, it reminded me that real wealth isn't in money. It's in moments like this." Just then, the door opened again. Margaret entered, her bright scarf fluttering as she smiled at Emily. She saw her son and raised an eyebrow playfully, signing, "You told her, didn't you?" Harrison laughed. "Yes, Mom, I told her." Margaret walked over and took Emily's hands in hers, signing slowly, "Thank you for being kind when the world often isn't." Emily signed back with a trembling smile. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still matters." Margaret nodded, eyes shining. Then she turned to her son and signed, "See, Harrison, the world still has good people." He smiled softly. "Yes, Mom, it does." The three of them sat together for a while, sharing tea and quiet conversation. For the first time in years, Harrison felt free. Not the billionaire everyone admired, but just a man sitting with two people who saw him for who he was. Later, when he left the cafe, he paused outside and looked back through the glass. Emily was laughing with a customer, her face lit with pure warmth. He thought about how strange life was, how a random cafe visit had changed so much. Inside, Emily watched him drive away and whispered to herself, "The world really is small and full of surprises." That night, she called Liam and told him everything. He didn't say much, but she could feel his happiness through his silence. "Maybe," he signed on the video call, smiling shyly. "People do notice kindness after all." Emily smiled back. "Yes," she said softly. "They do, even when we least expect it." Neither of them knew it yet, but that single act of kindness, helping a deaf woman feel understood, had started something far greater. It had opened hearts, bridged worlds, and reminded everyone involved that compassion is the truest language of all, one that needs no sound to be heard. The next day was bright and peaceful at the Golden Spoon Cafe. The sunlight streamed through the windows, making everything look warm and golden. Emily moved from table to table, humming softly, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She still couldn't stop thinking about what had happened yesterday, how Harrison and his mother had helped her brother, how their kindness had completely changed her day. She smiled every time she remembered it. But deep inside, she wondered, why had Harrison gone so far to help? Most rich people never even notice someone like her, yet he had not only listened but cared. The cafe was calm until the doorbell chimed again. When she turned, she froze in surprise. Harrison was standing there once more, dressed in a simple black coat. But this time he wasn't alone. His mother, Margaret, was with him, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. Emily smiled widely. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole. You look lovely today." Margaret grinned and began signing quickly. Emily laughed and replied in sign language, and the two women greeted each other with genuine warmth. Harrison watched quietly for a moment, his eyes filled with admiration. When they settled into their usual corner table, Harrison gestured for Emily to sit with them. She hesitated. "I can't really sit while I'm on duty," she said softly. "Just for a few minutes," he replied kindly. "Consider this a special meeting." Emily chuckled and finally sat down. "All right, but only a few minutes." There was a short pause. Margaret placed the bouquet on the table and gently pushed it toward Emily. Emily looked at her in surprise. "For me?" she asked. Margaret nodded, signing. "You brought light into my days. These are to thank you for that." Emily's heart melted. She blinked back happy tears and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Cole. That means so much to me." Harrison smiled softly. "My mother picked them herself this morning. She said they reminded her of you. Simple, bright, and full of life." Emily blushed slightly, unsure how to respond. "That's very sweet." Then Harrison's tone changed a little, still gentle but serious. "Emily, I actually came here today because I have something important to tell you." She looked at him curiously. "Something important?" "Yes," he said, folding his hands on the table. "You see, after what happened with your brother, I started thinking a lot about how people like you make the world better, quietly, without expecting anything in return. I've met hundreds of people in business. Clever, rich, powerful, but very few who are truly kind." Emily stayed silent, her eyes watching him carefully. He continued, "So, I've decided to start a new foundation. It will help people who work hard but struggle to make a difference. Teachers, caregivers, artists, people who help others selflessly. I want to name it after someone who inspired the idea." Emily blinked in surprise. "That's wonderful," she said. "But who inspired it?" Harrison smiled faintly. "You did." For a few seconds, she didn't move. "Me?" she whispered. Her voice he nodded. "Yes, you. You taught me something money never could. That real connection comes from the heart. The foundation will support people like your brother too. Talented individuals who only need a small chance to shine. And I want you to help me run it." Emily's eyes widened. "Me? Run it?" "Yes," Harrison said simply. "You understand people. You see what others miss. That's exactly what this foundation needs." Emily's heart pounded. She looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. "But I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about foundations or business or big projects." Almost trembling, Harrison smiled reassuringly. "That's exactly why you're perfect for it. You care, Emily. You don't see people as problems, you see them as stories. I can teach you everything else." Margaret nodded in agreement, signing, "You have the heart for it. That's what matters most." Emily felt her throat tighten. Her whole life, she had worked quietly, never imagining something like this would happen. She thought of the long hours, the days she came home tired but still smiled for her brother, the years of struggling to pay bills and keep faith. And now, suddenly, this opportunity, something that could truly change lives. She took a deep breath. "I don't know what to say. This is unbelievable." "Say yes," Harrison said gently. "Let's build something beautiful together. Something your brother can be proud of. Something my mother can smile about." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You're really serious about this?" "Completely," he replied. "I'll handle all the paperwork, funding, and management setup. You'll help choose who we support, visit families, talk to people. Be the heart of the project." She wiped her eyes quickly and laughed softly. "You're making it sound like a dream." Harrison leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes dreams are waiting for someone brave enough to live them." Emily looked at Margaret, who was smiling warmly, signing slowly. "Say yes, dear. You've already changed our world. Now it's time to change others." Finally, Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, I'll do it." Harrison's face lit up with genuine happiness. He extended his hand, and Emily shook it, her hand trembling slightly. "Welcome aboard," he said with a smile. "You have no idea how many lives you're about to touch." Margaret clapped her hands joyfully, and Emily laughed, the sound mixing with the cafe's gentle music. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt before, hope not just for herself, but for everyone she could help. As they sat together, talking about plans, dreams, and the future, other customers began to notice them. Some whispered, recognizing the billionaire, wondering what he was doing with a waitress. But Emily didn't care. For once, she wasn't thinking about how she looked or what people thought. She was thinking about what was possible. When they finally left, Harrison turned back at the door and said softly, "Be ready tomorrow. We'll start making plans." Emily smiled. "I'll be ready." After they left, she stood by the window, holding the bouquet of lilies in her hands. The world outside looked brighter somehow, like life had suddenly opened a new chapter. That night, when she told Liam about the offer, he signed excitedly, "You see, sis, kindness really comes back." Emily smiled, tears in her eyes again. "Yes," she whispered, "it does. It always does." And somewhere across the city, Harrison looked out from his high-rise office, thinking about the girl who had changed everything. Not with wealth, not with power, but with compassion. For him, it was no longer just about business or reputation. It was about purpose, and the waitress who reminded him that even the smallest act of kindness could start a chain of miracles that could change countless lives forever. The cafe was busier than ever that morning. Sunlight poured through the large front windows, glinting off the silver coffee machines and filling the room with a golden warmth. Emily was working behind the counter, her hair tied neatly, her familiar bright smile lighting up her face. But today was not an ordinary day. It was the beginning of something big, though she didn't know it yet. A week had passed since Harrison had offered her the life-changing opportunity to help him start the foundation. Plans had been moving quickly, meetings, phone calls, and endless ideas. Emily still couldn't quite believe it was real. She, a simple waitress, was now about to work with one of the most powerful men in the country to help people in need. But she hadn't left her cafe job yet. She wanted one more normal week before everything changed. That morning, Harrison and his mother, Margaret, walked in again. The customers turned to look. Some recognized the billionaire from newspaper photos, while others just stared in curiosity. Emily greeted them warmly as always. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole. And you too, Mr. Cole," she said cheerfully. Margaret smiled and began signing. "Good morning, Emily. You look happy today." Emily replied in sign language, "I'm always happy when I see you." Their friendly exchange caught the attention of a young woman sitting at a nearby table. She pulled out her phone and quietly started recording. The scene before her was heartwarming. A waitress and a billionaire's mother, communicating in sign language with so much warmth and laughter. It wasn't something you saw every day, and she wanted to share it online. Meanwhile, Harrison sat watching, his eyes soft. There was a quiet pride on his face as he looked between his mother and Emily. "You've changed her life," he said softly when Emily came to take their order. Emily smiled modestly. "She's changed mine too." A few minutes later, the cafe was full of the usual sounds. Clinking cups, laughter, soft chatter. But one moment stood out. Margaret suddenly stood up and signed to the whole cafe. "My son and I are starting something special with this wonderful young woman. She helped us remember what kindness looks like." Emily's face turned red with surprise as Harrison translated aloud so everyone could understand. "My mother says we're starting a charity foundation inspired by Emily's compassion. One that will help people like her brother and many others." There was a pause. Then the cafe erupted in applause. Customers smiled. Some even stood up to clap. Emily tried to hide her face, embarrassed and touched at the same time. Someone in the corner shouted, "That's amazing!" And another customer filmed the whole thing, posting it online with the caption, "Waitress's kindness inspires billionaire. His deaf mother's beautiful sign language moment will melt your sparkling heart." Within hours, that video spread everywhere. By evening, it had gone viral. Millions of people watched the heartwarming clip. Emily's hands moving gracefully in sign language, Margaret's bright laughter, and the crowd clapping for her. The internet fell in love with the story. Comments flooded in. Speech balloon, this made my day. Humanity still exists. Speech balloon, that waitress deserves the world. Speech balloon. So beautiful. Respect to the billionaire and his mom. Emily had no idea any of this was happening. She was still at the cafe, cleaning tables and humming softly, when her coworker Nina came running over, phone in hand. Emily, you need to see this right now. Emily frowned, confused. What's going on? Nina grinned and showed her the screen. It was a video of her signing with Margaret. The video already had over 3 million views. Emily's jaw dropped. That's me? Yes. You're trending everywhere. Nina said, laughing. People are calling you the kindness waitress. Look. News channels are sharing it too. Emily stared at the screen, stunned. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I don't even know what to say, she whispered. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Harrison. I think you've just become the face of our foundation. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. Later that evening, Harrison and Margaret invited her to their office for an urgent meeting. When she arrived, cameras and journalists were already waiting outside the building. Reporters shouted questions. Emily, how does it feel to inspire millions? Did you really teach yourself sign language? What's next for you and Mr. Cole's foundation? Emily was overwhelmed. Harrison noticed her nervousness and immediately came to her side. Don't worry, he said softly. You've got this. Inside, his office had been transformed into a small press room. On the screen behind them was the viral video, playing silently as reporters watched. Harrison stepped up to the podium first. My mother and I have been deeply moved by the response to this video, he said. What you saw wasn't planned. It was a real moment of kindness, a connection between two people who spoke different languages, yet understood each other perfectly. Then he looked at Emily. This young woman reminded us all that kindness doesn't need sound, wealth, or fame. It only needs a heart willing to care. He gestured toward her. And that's why today, I'm officially announcing the Hands of Hope Foundation, co-founded by Emily Sanders. The room burst into applause. Cameras flashed, and Margaret smiled proudly from the front row, signing, You deserve this, dear. Emily stepped forward, trembling slightly but smiling. She took a deep breath and spoke softly. I never imagined something like this. I just wanted to make people feel understood. If this story has touched anyone, then that means the world to me. Her voice was gentle but powerful. I believe that one small act of kindness can create ripples bigger than we ever expect. If I could do it, anyone can. The audience clapped again, many visibly moved. Harrison placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as the press continued taking photos. That night, as Emily returned home, she scrolled through her phone. Her inbox was full of messages from people all over the world. Parents of deaf children, teachers, artists, and even strangers thanking her for inspiring them. Her brother Liam had also seen the video. He signed excitedly during their video call. I told you, sis. The world finally sees your heart. Emily laughed, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, Liam, she said softly. They see our story. Meanwhile, Margaret sat at home, watching the viral clip again with a proud smile. She turned to her son and signed, You chose the right person. Harrison nodded. No, he said quietly. The right person chose kindness and changed everything. From that day on, Emily's life was never the same. The Hands of Hope Foundation became a global symbol of compassion and inclusion. Emily traveled to schools and hospitals, meeting children who couldn't hear but could feel love through her hands. But despite all the fame, she never stopped visiting the Golden Spoon Cafe. Every week, she would sit at her old table with Margaret, share a cup of tea, and sign a few words that had started it all. Kindness doesn't need a voice. It just needs a heart. And somewhere, the world kept watching, reminded that sometimes, one small act of love can echo louder than 1,000 words.